Without an economic system, no society could survive. And the two major world systems are capitalism and Marxism, or combination of both. Marxist socialism and communism are almost the same. The difference is that governments own all private property under communism, but under socialism, most citizens do. Small, devoutly religious groups through history were said to be socialist or communist, but that's misleading since the modern Marxist versions are far different. Marxism became widespread chiefly through Karl Marx, who was of Jewish ancestry, and his book, The Communist Manifesto. To defend Marxism, an acquaintance mentioned reading Karl Marx's entire manifesto. He noted that the book had no logical fallacies and good points were made. The young man advocated the correction of society's abuses with socialistic policies found therein. For example, the Industrial Revolution made capitalism especially problematic. That is, a bourgeoisie class would arise, comprised of those who own all the expensive machinery. They'd rule over the proletariat, a working class whose only value is their labor power. Because the bourgeoisie completely controlled the means of production, the proletariat could never get ahead. So some Marxist theory was correct. But it's not primarily what Marx wrote in his manifesto that's a problem, it's the exclusions. For example, although Marxism recognizes the quote-unquote slave master as evil, so-called slaves are treated as good merely because they're oppressed, although most oppressed people would happily become oppressors if given the chance. The giant problem is what Marx excluded and hid from others. Truthfully, Marxists do not seek a classless society. They cunningly seek to create two classes, the masses and themselves. Although Marxists rail against social and economic injustice, they've been instrumental in creating those very problems. This caused society to become desperate and seek a radical solution such as Marxism. This popular support then gave Marxists greater power in government bureaucracy. After achieving greater power, leaders within their movement sneakily caused even greater economic injustice. This in turn caused people to become even more desperate and cry even more for Marxism's elusive promises, a vicious circle. Interestingly, only a knowledge of the Jews provides the key to understanding Marxism's inner goal. The overall problem is fallen human nature. If humans were perfectly moral, large-scale Marxism would work well. But since we're so far from that, the major problems constantly arise. For example, Marxism always requires the government to enforce the redistribution of wealth from those who have a surplus to the needy. These governments abuse their power to make themselves rich, keeping a large portion of the tax money, and only redistributed a fraction, leaving all their citizens poor overall. Also, by taking large amounts of money from productive workers and giving it to the unproductive lack the motivation to become productive and become even more lazy. It also discourages hard workers from being productive. In my country, the Marxist program of welfare quickly became a social disaster. The result is millions of illegitimate and fatherless children. Fathers are disposed of. Millions of women are dependent on the government instead. Our Marxist policy of affirmative action gives less qualified or unqualified workers preferential treatment because of imaginary racial persecution. Their socialism is implemented regardless of morals or ability, such as free education for everyone and welfare for the irresponsible. That's because Marxism ignores human differences. So to create equality for the masses, Marxism seeks to create a classless society instead of class status being based on ability or merit. They go so far to create equality that it eliminates individualism. But again, that's for the masses, not Marxist leaders. For example, race is no consideration for the common people or is considered an artificial construct, while the government is of one united race or ethnicity, which they zealously try to keep pure. Marxist governments are always huge and powerful. They own all businesses and enterprises or work towards that end. They own most of their money through heavy taxation and sometimes own all property. Therefore, everyone is heavily dependent on the government. And if the government is evil, it even has the power to murder its citizens, such as the genocides in the Soviet Union under Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, and in China under Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao. There have been over 100 million people killed under communist regimes, besides people being sent to Siberia under torturous conditions. We must also consider that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapsed. China has been successful, but know that China is over 4,000 years old, and the Chinese Communist Party didn't come to power until 1949. And it wasn't long before it caused major problems. Consider that in the 1980s, China achieved fantastic improvements in agricultural production by abolishing rural communes of a communistic nature and returning land to individual holdings. Though European countries such as Norway, Sweden, and Scandinavia were achieving great success, that wouldn't have lasted as Europe was going bankrupt through its Marxist socialism. Therefore, Europe put its Marxist socialism in check. And those same policies of international socialism certainly wouldn't work in the United States, as America has far more people than any of those European countries and has a far greater diversity of people. Since people by and large prefer their own ethnicity, conflicts would be horrendous. And Marxists are anti-religion, as religion would give people hope in a higher power other than their Marxist governments, or the state is the higher power. Such governments take from their citizens by force, eliminating the free will principle of voluntary charity, which should come from a loving heart. And consider that by adopting Marxist socialist policies, we can eventually arrive at full-blown communism. Capitalism and Marxism dominate our planet because people can abuse either system by taking advantage of others and aggrandizing themselves. Often the same group of people are behind the manipulation of both systems and flip-flop between the two based on whichever system benefits them more at the time. Both systems can be seen as one monstrous entity, as a giant two-headed skeleton with vampire teeth. However, a third option exists and solves this conundrum. I will explain it some other time. But just remember these things for now. Take care.